Join us in attending the Online Research Colloquium 2021, organized by the Department of Higher Education and Training in collaboration with the SETAs, the three quality councils, the South African Qualifications Authority, and the University of Cape Town. Case studies on Open Learning Unit are co-funded by the European Union. The 2021 Research Colloquium is funded by the National Skills Fund. Flexible and blended learning in post-school education and training. This year's colloquium is hosted by the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Bladen Zimande. The Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Mr. Butima Namela, will deliver opening remarks. The Research Colloquium will be an online event that takes place over a period of 3 weeks. Don't miss this great virtual experience. Get ready for it as we share new and emerging research on open learning.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Marsha Mahlalela, and I'm going to be your moderator today for Webinar 5. Today's theme is going to be focusing on inclusivity in post-school education and training. Our speakers today will be speaking on exploring an RPL model that maximizes inclusivity, best practices, providing inclusivity, addressing economic and cultural and political injustices faced by students, the research and pilot on the Ntombi Vimbela Female Social Justice Call to Action. On behalf of the department, we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the partners and sponsors who have made this colloquium possible. On your side panel, you have a chat window. Please engage with us. Tell us where you're watching from. There will be a series of polling questions that we broadcast throughout the session. These are timed, and therefore we ask you to respond quickly. We would like to remind you of the ongoing competition that we're carrying on this platform, where you stand a chance to win one of the 4 laptops on offer. The guidelines are available on the microsite, and this is the competition. We would like to also remind all the delegates that there will be a series of survey questions that will be posted on the chat. We ask you to please complete the survey in order to assist us to improve the quality of service. Please also note that all presentations and videos from Webinar 1, including today's and the other event that's coming up on Wednesday, will all be uploaded on the Colloquium website. The website address is www.dhetresearchcolloquium.co.za. Without wasting any more time, I'd like to introduce our chairperson who's going to be presiding over these discussions. Ms. Tree van Veek, welcome back, and we're looking forward to you chairing this webinar.
Good morning, Marcia, and good morning to all the participants. It's really for me an honor to be back here today to share the fifth webinar. And we have got, I couldn't believe it's the fifth one already, where we are going to talk about open learning and the whole research colloquium. You know that is our theme, but the research colloquium is an annual event by the department in collaboration with the South African Qualifications Authority and 3 Quality Council that provide a platform for researchers to share new and emerging research, interrogate national and international research evidence, but also to identify research gaps in relation to the PSET system. This year's theme is open learning, flexible and blended learning and teaching approaches in the post-school education and training system. And as you know, this was quite a topical topic through COVID and the times that we are in at the moment. And when we look at open learning, every time we give the definition of open learning, as it is coming from the 1995 white paper already, and interesting, in our last webinar, one of the speakers recommended that we have to re-look at the definition of open learning. But open learning is a principle-based definition that's looking at increase to access, success, and quality. So it's 3 ups and 1 down. So it's increased access, increased success, increased quality, but the cost must be coming down. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges, to look at the cost, not by doing anything wrong in terms of quality or access, but look at what is the most cost-effective way and methodology to get people to increase access and success and to complete in the PSET system. So we have to remove the barriers to learning and make learning and teaching student-focused. But for me, like I said, the most important is that we also have to look at quality and at student success. During the first 4 webinars, we looked at different aspects of open learning, but for today, we are focusing on inclusivity in the PSET system. During the presentations, you will be introduced to the COOL project. We have got 2 presentations on the COOL project this time, and it stands for the case study on open learning. This project forms part of the bigger teaching and learning development support reform contract and is funded by the European Union. We want to thank the European Union for their support of the vision of the department to build the research capacity of young researchers in South Africa in open learning. We have commissioned the Center for Innovation, Learning and Teaching at the University of Cape Town to lead the COOL project. They have identified young researchers to conduct 16 open learning case studies in PSET in a Southern African context under the leadership of a wonderful team from UCT that was initially led by Professor Cheryl Hodgkinson-Williams. And she will post in the chat who are all the members of this wonderful team that led the COOL project. The 2021 Research Colloquium provides therefore an opportunity also for these researchers to present their research findings. But you must also recognize that these research studies were done in the time of COVID, and there were quite challenges in their research. But how they overcome it, it's just amazing. And I really want to congratulate everyone who has already presented and who will be presenting today. So without wasting any further time, let us start with our very exciting group of researchers that will also talk about their research and their findings on inclusivity in the PSET system. So, but we, as usual, we have a keynote address, and our keynote address this morning, we are honored to have a keynote by Professor Linda Cooper from the University of Cape Town. And Linda, can I ask you, thank you, to put on your video. Professor Linda Cooper is Emeritus Associate Professor at the University of Cape Town. Her research interests have focused on the relationship between different forms of knowledge, and she has published widely on recognition of prior learning, widening access to adult learners in higher education, and workers' education. Her book publications include Workers' Education in the Global South, Radical Adult Education, and The Crossroads, and then also Renewing Workers' Education Towards a Radical Alternative Vision. And she co-authored the RPL as Specialized Pedagogy, Crossing the Lines. Professor Linda Cooper, thanks also for making your time available, and we are looking forward to listen to you while delivering your keynote address today. And after that, we will have a discussion with Linda. So let your questions come into the chat so that we can ask Linda those questions after her presentation. Linda, Prof, we are looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My presentation is going to be exploring a particular theoretical model of recognition of prior learning, RPL. In other words, a particular way of conceptualizing RPL. I taught in the field of adult education at UCT for many years and engaged as a practitioner in RPL, giving alternative access to many of our adult education students. My colleagues and I had always had an interest in reflecting critically on RPL. And in 2009, we had the opportunity to join a large-scale SACWA-funded research project on RPL led by my colleague Alan Ralphs at UWC. And I'll now begin to explain that research project to you via my slide presentation. So one of the key incentives driving this project was that although national policy on RPL had existed for some time, it was clear that there'd been relatively little implementation, particularly in the higher education field. RPL in South Africa has always had a very strong equity purpose to widen access to those historically excluded from learning opportunities. So we were concerned in this research project to know what is it that's blocking the implementation of RPL? Why have some of the projects succeeded and others haven't? And how particularly can we make it as inclusive a process as possible? Just before I go a bit further to explain the outcome of that research, I wanted to just make the distinction between RPL and CAT. RPL is used for admission into a program of study for access or for exemption from one of the modules in that program of study. CAT, or credit accumulation and transfer, is used to apply for the transfer of credits from subjects or modules acquired in a previous program of study, of formal study. So RPL deals with prior non-formal and informal learning, whereas CAT deals with prior formal learning. So back to the research project, which comprised of 4 case studies: RPL into undergraduate study, RPL into postgraduate study, a case study of workplace RPL into a level 5 occupational qualification, and a set of non-credit bearing programs at a workers' college. The research had a number of lines of inquiry, but probably key among them was our concern to theorize the nature of RPL, to come to some kind of understanding of the inner workings of RPL. RPL originated in the practices of adult education, and it draws strongly on the tradition of experiential learning. In other words, that learning that takes place in a constant cycle of experiencing the world, reflecting critically on our experience, drawing links between our experience and more general principles or insights, and then armed with that knowledge, testing it out again. This is a very well-established model of learning, and it's widely used, particularly in applied contexts of learning. One of the key features of this experiential learning model is the assumption that knowledge is much the same, or at least equivalent, across contexts. So this would make it possible then to see RPL as a fairly straightforward assessment device to map one body of knowledge, working knowledge or experiential knowledge, against another body of knowledge or academic knowledge. So the question was posed for us, why has this apparently straightforward process of assessment often proved so complex and so difficult to implement? At the time that we began this research, there were fierce debates amongst education policymakers in South Africa. This was in the late 1990s, over the school curriculum. You'll remember that the early school curriculum reforms brought into being a strong OBE, or outcomes-based educational focus, with an emphasis on learning by doing. Critics of the OBE, or learning by doing approach, argued that the problem with this approach is that it downplays the importance of formal bodies of knowledge, and it downplays the importance of teaching itself. These critics argued that we need to recognize the differentiated nature of knowledge and skills, and in particular, the difference between codified bodies of knowledge that we transmit in formal educational contexts on the one hand, and the more experiential knowledge gained through work or through everyday experience. I'm going to just jump ahead to the next slide, where it puts forward some of the key ways in which it was argued formal knowledge differs from experiential knowledge. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this fairly binary approach to differentiating between the two forms of knowledge. However, if we accept the implication that experiential knowledge is not the same as codified knowledge, and that it's not always necessarily a good platform for the acquisition of codified knowledge, then this presents us with a bit of a conundrum. How then is RPL possible? And if it is possible, how can we ensure that RPL becomes optimally inclusive rather than a tool for exclusion? The key conclusions that we gathered from this research was to build a theoretical model which sees RPL as a boundary crossing practice, a practice for mediating knowledge and learning and assessment across contexts. If RPL is going to be this practice of assisting people to cross boundaries, then it needs to be seen as a form of pedagogy. And we described it at the end of our research project as a specialized pedagogic practice for providing tools for navigating and dialogue across different knowledge domains. And we will come back to that in future slides. Just some qualifiers, however. While we accepted that experiential knowledge is not necessarily the same as, or even necessarily a good platform for entering higher education, we had the sense that we should not conflate sight of knowledge with the type or complexity of knowledge. So we all know that in everyday contexts or in the workplace, there is both theory and practice. And in the formal education context, there are many programs of study like tourism or business or engineering where we draw a lot on practical knowledge as well as theoretical principles. The second point is that there is a need to be mindful of critiques of our dominant Western epistemology, and in doing so also to recognize and value and engage with epistemologies and knowledge crafted outside of the academy. And the third qualifier that we had was that we should not place exclusive value on scientific forms of knowledge or very conceptual forms of knowledge, and that these need to be in dialogue with experiential and other forms of knowledge. And just to take a brief detour to look at Vygotsky, the Russian cognitive psychologist, who I think captured this very well. He argued that there is a difference between the two main kinds of concepts that we deal with, between what he called scientific concepts, developed through specialized methods of research, and spontaneous concepts, developed through the experience of the everyday. However, what was important was that he argued that it's not so much the difference between these two kinds of concepts that are as important as the relationship between them, and that it's in this interaction between scientific concepts and everyday concepts, it's in this interaction that abstract concepts become meaningful and that everyday concepts acquire some logical structure and criticality. The position of recognizing the differentiated nature of knowledge had a number of implications for us engaged in RPL. Firstly, differentiation of knowledge doesn't only apply to the distinction between formal knowledge and experiential knowledge. Our research revealed that there is knowledge differentiation also within everyday knowledge, and that there are definitely more specialized forms of experiential knowledge that seem to provide a better platform for navigating RPL and CAT than other kinds of experiential knowledge. For example, a lot of my own research has been on workers' education, and in particular trade union education. And I found that because of the necessity, for example, of trade unionists to engage with a range of specialized knowledge fields, economics, labor law, a range of policy areas, organization development, they often bring specialized experiential knowledge as RPL applicants that acts as a very good platform or launch pad into higher education in one of those fields. A second implication that we noted was quite important was that this differentiation of knowledge means that RPL cannot be reducible to one size fits all, but it needs to assume different forms in different contexts. And all of you will be conscious of the way in which formal academic knowledge is divided into different disciplinary areas and which in turn draw on different knowledge or research bases. And we found that some disciplines or fields clearly lend themselves better to RPL than others. And I want to briefly mention some research done by my colleague Judy Harris and a Canadian colleague of hers, Christine Wyack, on RPL into a vocationally oriented Canadian university. They focused on 5 different undergraduate programs. So these, it was a vocationally oriented institution, but it had some science degrees as well as the more applied programs. Their methodology was to interview staff from each of these programs to get a sense from them of which of these programs would be most open or amenable to RPL. Before they conducted their exercise, they did a little, before they conducted their research, they did a little exercise to predict the feasibility of RPL based on their understanding of the kind of knowledge underpinning the curriculum in each of these areas. For example, science, they assumed that because the science curriculum would follow a more conceptual logic, progressing, according to conceptual building blocks, and because it's relatively removed from practice, that would have low fees.
Dr. Linda Cooper, can I ask you to switch on your video? Can I ask you, is it possible for you just to give us the concluding remarks of your presentation as we had it on the video, if you have your notes with you? May I ask that you switch on your audio as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I think that the important points coming out of the Canadian case study was that the structure of the knowledge underpinning the curriculum was a factor affecting the feasibility of RPL, but at the same time, there were a number of other factors besides the nature of knowledge. And these included the willingness of lecturers to engage with RPL, and in particular the existence of professional bodies and whether the regulations of professional bodies made it possible or hindered the implementation of RPL. And finally, they also found that the nature of the labour market itself and the degree to which the labour market was regulated or unregulated had an impact on the feasibility of RPL. What we then did was that we proceeded to look at the impact of a range of contextual factors on RPL, and in particular on the inner workings of RPL. In other words, the particular form or model of RPL that would likely be most appropriate for the different contextual conditions. And we looked at 3 different models. The one was, we called a translational model. The second was the navigational model. And the third we called a dialogical model. With the translational model, this captured the nature of RPL in one of our case studies, which was a private higher education college offering mainly occupational qualifications. And because they were carrying out the RPL against unit standard-based qualifications, the nature of the RPL tended to be a process of translating the experiential knowledge of the candidates into the unit standard-based language of occupational qualifications. With the navigational model, which we recognized in the case of a large comprehensive university where they offered a 3-month RPL course, portfolio building course into formal education. What they were in essence doing was providing RPL candidates with the tools to navigate from their largely narrative-based literacies into the more paradigmatic literacies of academic learning. And finally, the dialogical model we thought was characterized very much by one of the case studies, which was a workers' college, where it offered non-formal qualifications, but provided a route from the college into a local university, an RPL route. And the model of RPL which they practiced was very much an in-curriculum kind of RPL, where they enacted that dialogical, that dialogue, if you like, between the conceptual and the experiential that was described earlier in Vygotsky's work. In conclusion then, I just wanted to sum up the key theoretical principles then that came out of this research project. The first is that we accepted the differentiation of knowledge, that it was important to do so in order to take into account the kind of journey that RPL candidates would need to undertake to be successful in RPL and for the whole process to have quality. Secondly, that RPL should be seen as a form of boundary pedagogy, a specialized pedagogic practice providing tools for navigation across knowledge domains and across learning contexts. So while we might want to provide greater efficiency by doing RPL in a quick and dirty way, what we were arguing is that it needs to be taken seriously as a pedagogic practice, and the resources need to be made to meet those requirements. Thirdly, we recognize that not all, there's nothing like no one size fits all, and that the nature of the discipline, the knowledge area, as well as a range of contextual factors, including the departmental culture, the labor market, the existence of professional bodies, all of these factors need to be taken into account to assess the viability of RPL. And our final point, which we felt quite strongly about, was that RPL needs to be seen as an opportunity to enrich our knowledge base. It really can be a catalyst for building a knowledge archive in higher education that is more open, that is inclusive, that is enriched, and which is just as rigorous as we have had before. Thank you very much. That summarizes the key points from my presentation, and I'd be very happy to take questions. If I can answer them, I will.
Thank you, Professor Cooper. I think that was a wonderful presentation, in the sense that we get sometimes we're just doing things, but it's so important also to build that theoretical model of understanding also of what we're doing, and that it's grounded within theoretical practice. And I'm really excited that you have produced or presented to us that what we are trying to apply in our colleges and in our universities, the pedagogical soundness and the theoretical ground of that is so important. Thanks for your presentation. We really, I enjoyed it profoundly. What for me is important is we are in an open learning conference and webinar, and one of the principles of open learning is RPL, is the recognition of prior or just of learning, because learning is taking place in different contexts, and it also focuses on the student. And you reiterated it several times to say it's not a one size fits all. And I think that is one of the things that we must be very careful when applying, even in our institutions, RPL, is that you cannot just do it the same for everyone or the same for every discipline that you are working in. But I think the second point that for me is very important is that when applying RPL, we recognize also the value of learning. And that is what we are here for, and that is what is so important. And that open learning or RPL is not a second best. It's specialized. You use the word specialized experiential knowledge. So it's not a second best. It's not an easy way of entering into a qualification or get access to studies or to get access to work or to professional designations. So my first question is, based on what you said, the conundrum that you have outlined, on how can we ensure that RPL becomes optimally inclusive rather than a tool for exclusion? And the question is, if we look at RPL and inclusivity, how does the model apply to people with disabilities? Can you just please put on your audio? Just put on your audio.
Sorry. Thanks for a really very nice summary and for the question as well. We had a program offered through our medical faculty at UCT, which focused specifically on disability studies. And they were attempting to draw people who'd been disability activists specifically into that program. And I was drawn in to assist them to put in place an RPL process into that program. I think it was one of the most successful examples of RPL, partly because they took a great deal of trouble in the RPL process in making allowance for the needs of people with different kinds of disabilities. So, you know, that would be taking into account and providing alternative ways of expressing themselves and of engaging with learning. But I think most of all, what they were most struck by was the incredible richness of the knowledge that those disability activists were able to bring into the program. They literally rewrote a large part of the curriculum on the basis of those experiences of the RPL candidates who had a mass of experiential knowledge, but little formal training. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it was a very successful example of RPL. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. So it is possible, and I think that is the message I got also from your presentation, is there's always a possibility. We must just look for it and really look down into the quality and the access and not just take it for granted as a thing that happened automatically. The next question that's coming from Noshina Mansour is, do you believe that micro-credentials have a role to play in the practice and offering of RPL models and options?
Yes, thanks very much for that question, Noshina. I did attend the session last week on micro-credentials, and I must say I found it incredibly interesting in terms of the kind of possibilities that it offered. Certainly, in the European context, micro-credentials are used quite extensively to build what they call skills passports. And it's an EU-recognized portfolio of competencies and abilities. And it's a portfolio that people use both to seek employment across the EU, but interestingly, it's also used as a means to, as a route into through RPL into higher education. So it has been piloted and used there, and I think that it would be a great research project to explore its use in our own context.
Thank you. Vikas, welcome again to this webinar. I think Vikas is one of our most active participants. He's asking you, and he's coming from the TVET college sector, where the whole sector and learning is quite regulated. And he's asking, how could RPL be regulated with regard to the costing model, timeframes, moderations of processes, etc. That's very fixed and very standard, to help ensure it is used effectively in a standardized manner.
Thank you.
Ms. Van Wyk, we seem to have lost the connection on Linda's side. Can I ask that we probably move on to our next presentation, and we can reconnect with her when we do the Q&A at the end at the end of the session.
Thanks, Marsha. And we have asked Professor to remain for the discussion at the end of the other presentations. So you will have the opportunity to ask the questions. I've got a question also, because we will ask the question again, as well as the question from Pedro. So our next speaker, and I want to thank in her absence for Professor Cooper, and I think it was a very interesting theoretical grounding of what we regard as RPL and how do we focus on inclusivity and not exclusivity. So the next person that we are going to welcome to our screen, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ntemba Zungu Mr. Ntemba Zulu, as well as Dr. Pinky Mshlangu, who's our next two speakers. And the first speaker is Ms. Gertrude van Wyk, who will take the argument of open learning to support students with disabilities further, whilst the remaining two speakers will provide research findings on case studies within the two different institutions. This will be followed then, as I previously said, by a question and answer session with the three remaining presenters. So please remember to post your questions on the chat so that we will engage with them after the fourth presentation. Each of the speakers will introduce themselves at the beginning of the presentation, and therefore our first speaker is Ms. Gertrude van Wyk with her presentation titled Opening Up Learning to Students Living with Disability at Mateo TVET College. Ms. Gertrude van Wyk, and she's now a family member of mine, thanks for making yourself available, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, greetings to everyone. This is Gertrude from US, but I am a South African. I'm here to pursue my doctoral degree in educational leadership with a focus in gifted education. Okay, today I'm going to present a case study 3. It's all about opening up learning to students with living with disabilities at Mateo TVET College. Right, like I indicated, the topic is that. It's case study 3 that is represented by me. Oh, that's a little bit of my background. I did all other degrees at Central University of Technology. The trigger of the study is about persons with disabilities do not have equitable access to PSET. To further opening up learning to students living with disability, the DHET published a draft on open learning policy framework for PSET in April 2017. The extent to which open learning is being adopted by TVET colleges is still not known. Mateo TVET College was identified by DHET for displaying encouraging ways of opening up learning to students with living with disabilities. The key concepts are about open learning and disability access. Open learning is focused on removing barriers to access created by various factors, such as we'll concentrate on disability. That is from the DHET 2017 with the number quoted. From a biopsychosocial view, disability originates from an individual health condition, but it is influenced by an individual, and that individual's contextual factors such as environmental and personal factors. That is cited from Pretorius. Policies and prior research. To work on this, the strong policy that suffers the study. It's about strategic policy framework on disability for the PSET system. And then there is a moderate week planning that centers of specialization to support students with disabilities to be funded, or ring-fence funding from College Office, that is DHET 2020, page 40. Prior research, little evidence of implementation of disability policies in TVET colleges in South Africa. It's been experienced. The plea for systematic change for online accessibility within a universal design for learning framework. That's been cited from McKenzie and Dalton 2020. The research question for this case study, it's how has Motheo College opened up learning to students living with mobility, visual, hearing, communication, intellectual, emotional, or multiple impairments? Methodology. We did a qualitative case study. I held the in-depth interviews online with 2 senior managers and 4 members of staff. As we all know that COVID changed our whole live routine. We couldn't find the students, they were unavailable. And the data was analyzed into themes such as access, progression, and success, and into another theme of economic, cultural, and political responses that endeavor to mitigate injustices students living with disabilities face. The findings: access to TVET. People living with disabilities are encouraged to enroll at Motheo College. In 2020, there were 291 differently abled students. The environment seems to be suitable because it has got physical infrastructure, sign interpreters, braille textbooks, and large keyboards, headsets, and large screens. I would say the college did the very best here. NSFAS is also funding for this learners' tuition, and for the assistive devices, they're also being provided with funds to buy that and the software that they use as well. But Motheo College does not have its own accommodation facilities, obliging students to rent privately owned accommodation. Students must either make use of public transport or arrange with a taxi company at their own cost. Municipal roads and pavements are not really disability friendly. With the progression through TVET, supportive attitude from staff towards students living with disabilities, it's been experienced and demonstrated very well. There are dedicated organizational structures and services, such as student support services upon their arrival and the registration and all that. And there's a guidance on disability-specific course selection. But students are not always willing to declare their disability. For some reasons, they maybe feel like they don't want to be, stigmatized. And then they can take longer to complete studies and can lose NSFAS funding in process. Because once you fail the course, the NSFAS doesn't repay for that course. Success at TVET, there's a suitable work integrated learning placement. Graduating students take necessary equipment with them, e.g. the laptop with screen reader software that has been installed from the college, into work environment that is very supportive. And in the responsive way of exiting support provided by staff, they do engage with the students. They have ways of contacting with them whenever they experience problems in using the software at the workplace. They really do support them. And there's a routine that they do as well, like yearly, or as long as the students need support, even though the student has left the college, because they engage with them, they keep record of them, and then they help them out with whatever that they need in their workplace. But not always easy for qualified students to find a suitable job. Yeah, it was a problem because other companies don't really recognize the students, and I think they judge them in regard to their type of disability. And then the social infrastructure and services not always disability friendly. That is non-availability of screen readers at police stations, hospitals, that would expect, for students to have them on their veil. The recommendations, Motheo College should really continue engaging with international and national partners. They've having a very strong bond, and this is really in favor of students living with disabilities. Yes, they really gain access in whatever their needs are, and this has been very helpful, even though some of the needs are not really met. But I believe with the continuation of the international and national partners relationship, things will be better. The DHEAD and Motheo College should consider in building disability-friendly accommodation so that the students do not, find themselves being struggling with having to pay from their pockets and ordering people to take them to college and all that. It's quite frustrating for them. The DHEAD should look into the universal learning design and digital accessibility principles in educational materials and extend inclusion of these principles in the open learning policy framework. NSFAS or CETAs are additional tuition funding for students living with disabilities, as they can take longer to complete studies. It's recommended that they look into it, especially for these students, because it's not like they are deliberate. It's the kind of disabilities that they find themselves in. And I mean, nobody can change that. So there should be somehow, they should be accommodated, somehow. That's what we recommend, that they should look into it and have some additional tuition funding, that will be so helpful for the students, because it really frustrates them. The municipalities, they really need to improve the state of roads and pavements. Yeah, it's not really safe for the students, and it's very risky. They are surviving because of the friends or people who feel sorry for them, or people who wants to extend a helping hand. But what if the conditions do not allow? I mean, it's always risky. So municipalities really have to improve into looking at the state of roads and the pavements. They should be suitable for wheelchairs and all that, for those who cannot see. They should be able to make their way to classes without any barriers. employers, all right, here the employers really need to look into qualified people living with disabilities in terms of hiring such. These students need an extra passionate care and support. So in terms of employment, employers really need to be very critical about it. Well, the references for these case studies, some of these references that are outstanding is the Department of Higher Education and Training, of course, the Strategic Policy Framework on Disability for the Post-School Education and Training System, that is retrieved from that. And then the Pretoria's Bell and Haley of 2019 about access, equality, and inclusion of disabled students within South Africa, South African further and higher education institutions. And then Mackenzie and Dalton of 2020, Universal Design for Learning in Inclusive Education and Policy, South Africa. African Journal of Disability, that is retrieved from that. The acknowledgements, the citation, and the license. Okay, the thank you always to Prof. Cheryl Hoskin-Williams for her unconditional support. It has been outstanding. Yes, and the team as well. The citation, that's Van Beek G of 2021 about case study 3, that is opening up learning to students living with disabilities at Motel TVET College. That is retrieved from that website. And then the license, finally, that's what we have down there. This is the end of my story. And thank you so much for giving me a hearing.
Thank you, Gertrude, and thanks for your presentation. It was really a fresh look at people with disabilities, and there were several questions coming in to ask you specifically about the students declaring their disabilities and not finding a suitable job, and about NSFAS. So thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to the question and answering session later on. The next speaker is Ms. Sinitemba Zungu, whose topic is exploring how student support services address economic, cultural, and political injustices. And the insights are from the Elangeni TVET College. I just want to note the question of TP Malingma, who asked if the presentations will be available. Yes, all the presentations, the videos, as well as the questions with the answers by our presenters will be made available on the platform. So, Sinitemba, you will be presenting on how student support services address economic, cultural, and political injustices, and we are looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sinitemba Zungu, and I will be presenting today on my study on exploring how student support services addresses economic, cultural, and political injustices, drawing from insights on the Elangeni TVET College. I will now begin my presentation. I am from a community called Hamazal Isankonje Mopela. I have a background in community and development studies. I have a postgraduate master's degree in housing. I am currently part of the Municipal Innovation Maturity Index project at UKZN. I am passionate about research on social justice, equitable education, and innovation studies. I'm currently enrolled as a PhD student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And this study was triggered by the need for South African education institutions to cater to the needs of the diverse student population. The underlying idea in the study was to understand the extent to which the current TVET student support models are designed to encompass open learning practices, and the extent to which they consider, firstly, the economic inequalities, secondly, the cultural and social diversity, and thirdly, inclusive representation and decision-making. And the main research question was, how does student support address economic, cultural, and political challenges faced by students at the Elangeni TVET College? And I was interested to find out what support challenges are experienced by students at the Elangeni TVET College. How is the concept of open learning understood at Elangeni College? And lastly, how do these two phenomena relate to one another? This was a qualitative study, and I employed semi-structured Zoom interviews and WhatsApp chat discussions with 2 students and 3 staff members. And the study was done as COVID-19 hit in South Africa and the national lockdown was implemented. So some of the limitations were around having to change my methodology to adapt to the current situation of COVID-19. And this also impacted the time to build rapport with some of the participants and the ability to find students to participate virtually, considering that most of the students, actually all of the students, were at home during that time. And some of the insights around the perceptions of open learning from the student support services staff. I draw from one of the staff members who say, who perceive open learning as as perhaps not yet limited or implemented at the college as of yet, and rather recognize it as to part of a group that went to training. They highlight that open learning was introduced to them in 2017, and then also relates it to technological advances, while they highlight that I think that will change in terms of how open learning is implemented at the college. And he goes on to say, especially with COVID and Giyazi Ama students, which is translated to, I know the students would be getting laptops soon. And then further says, I think izosebenza, it will work, right? But not now, our students don't even have laptops. So here we recognize that it is they associated with technological advancement or adoption in terms of students getting laptops. And in addition, student support staff here, we can synthesize, do not see open learning as part of student support services and recognize it as the responsibility of the curriculum unit. And we recognize here that the top-down approach is not filtering through to all departments of the college as envisioned. And student support services staff may be partly familiar with the term open learning, but they do not believe it is applied at the college. And moving to the student support services plan, they recognize that the plan does not mention open learning and open learning or implementing open learning practices. There is an absence of technological support. There is no mention of open educational resources, and student support services is under-resourced. And I think drawing from some of the experiences from the students and staff that were interviewed, there was a recognition that staff are willing to go over and above to assist students. And drawing from an example that was shared with the staff, that where there is, where private sector supports, for example, in terms of the pad drive, there was a pad drive at the time when I engaged with them, and when the private sector company were not able to fund the pad drive anymore, the staff would able to come together and have a box where they would each contribute or share and bring pads in order for students to have access to those for students who need it. So that's just an example of how staff are willing to go over and above, and to recognize that, and to recognize the shortfall of some of the private sector funding. And then in terms of the recommendations, it is recommended that further development of the draft open learning policy framework in line with the annual strategic plans, and this to be aligned with the student support services plan in order to make open learning practices implementable at the institutions. And more extensive advocacy and training is required. Again, to the DHEADs, is for the expansion of this research. It is recommended that this research be expanded to glean further insights from TVET management, especially the curriculum units. And to DHEADs and the college for the provision of technological support for students. In closing, I would like to send a huge thank you to DHEADs for initiating this crucial study, to the staff and students at Elangeni TVET College who participated in this research, the core team for all the support, and to Professor Cheryl Hodgkinson-Williams for her consistent patience and unconditional support. I have reached the end of my presentation, and I would like to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I will be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zemba, for your presentation. And I really think you have made excellent recommendations also to the Department of Higher Education and Training. And we will definitely get some questions on that. So thank you also for your presentation on open learning. And I think you have demonstrated for me one thing, is that open learning, because it's a principle-based approach to teaching and learning, we fall into the gap of trying to apply open learning. And open learning is about openness. It's about removing the barriers to learning, as you have said in the beginning of your presentation. But when you apply it, you focus on the barriers and you focus on the solution, and not on open learning, because open learning becomes this panacea for everything, and that is not what it is. It's a basket of principles that we have to apply to ensure access, success, as well as quality. Thanks a lot, and well done with your presentation. I really think it was an excellent presentation. Now, I am looking forward to our next presentation. Colleagues and participants, I want to say to you, Dr. Pinky Mshlangu is one of the people that I always want to listen to, because she has got this passion for what she's doing, and the research that they have done with the Medical Research Council that she is going to present now on the topic, the development and the pilot of the Ntombi Mbela project, is I have heard this of a similar presentation before, and it's so great to listen to you again, Pinky, and to what you are offering to specifically the TVET college sector. And there was one question that was coming from, what are you doing with CET colleges? Also, how we can apply that into the CET college sector. So we really are looking forward to listen to you. But Dr. Pinky Mashlangu is a specialist scientist at the Gender and Health Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council and an honorary lecturer at the School of Public Health at the University of the Witwatersrand. A key focus of her research has been on the understanding the drivers and risk factors for women and children experiences of gender-based violence in South Africa, and on development and testing of evidence-based interventions to prevent violence against women and children in low and middle income countries. Pinky, we are really looking forward to listen to you, and I know that there will be a lot of questions coming your way. So I'm looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Good day, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come present our work here today. We are very excited to be able to share this incredible work that we've done over a period of 4 years, where we've worked in TVETs and universities with young women around issues of sexual violence. So today I'll be presenting to you the formative research that we've conducted, where we developed and piloted a Ntombi Vimbela intervention. This is a manualized sexual violence intervention for post-school education and training female students in South African campuses. So I'll be taking you through the slides that I've developed today, and we can then have a discussion over this work that we've done. If there are any follow-up questions that you have, we'll discuss that at the end of my presentation. I am now going to share my slides just to take you through the work that we've done. So just to acknowledge the team that I've worked with on this work that we have done, just allow me a minute to share my slides. I've worked with colleagues that are listed on the screen, where we've developed this work in institutions of higher learning. I'm from the SAMRC Gender and Health Research Unit based in Pretoria. So just as an outline of the work, of the presentation that I'll be sharing to you, I'll be presenting the background. I'll be sharing a little bit about the work, why it was conceptualized, what we did. I'll also tell you about the aims and objectives of this research. I'll take you through the formative research findings that we found when we conducted this research. I will take you through the development process. I will describe Ntombi Vimbela intervention. I will then share with you the findings from the pilot of the intervention. I will then move over and conclude with implications and future work that we're planning to do. So just as a background, we all know that young women in higher education institutions in South Africa are at increased risk of experiencing sexual gender-based violence. And in that context, we also know that there is limited research to understand the extent of this problem, that being the prevalence, but also the drivers of this sexual gender-based violence in South African higher education settings, which is very, very important that we understand that so that we can inform the development of the interventions that are aimed to address the problem. I would also like to acknowledge the incredible work that has been done by the Department of Higher Education, which has developed the policy framework to address GBV in the PSET setting. Also to highlight that even in the framework, there is an acknowledgement of the limited understanding of the occurrence of SGBV in these institutions. Not much is known about related to the drivers, the prevention methods that can be used, reporting processes that are used in these institutions, to even investigate the issues whenever these occurrences are reported in the institution. So these are some of the gaps that are highlighted in the NSP, in the policy framework. And what this is telling us is that there is a need for interventions to be able to address this. But before we can do that, we need to understand the setting, understand the prevalence, understand the drivers, so that we can inform development of the intervention. So in terms of the activities and the work that we've done, really our study was aimed at gathering context-specific data to inform the development of this SGB prevention intervention for PSET setting. We undertaken a number of activities which were linked to the objectives that we were aiming to achieve at each stage of the research process. The first activity that we did was conducting a mixed methods formative research study, where the aim was to gather the data to be able to inform this intervention that we did. And this was done between the period of September 2018 up to March 2019. We then moved to the second activity, where we used the findings from the formative research that we conducted in one to develop an Ntombi Vimbela intervention. That is the name that we are calling the intervention that we developed. It is a manualized sexual violence intervention. It targets female students, particularly the first-year undergraduate students between the ages of 18 to 30. And some of you might be wondering why the first-year students. That is because it was influenced, or kind of a key finding that came out of the formative research, to say that in these institutions, yes, every woman is vulnerable to experience sexual violence, but we found that first-year students are particularly vulnerable to the experience of sexual violence, hence us trying to target the first-year female students. And then the third activity was when, after development of the intervention, we went to the institutions themselves. We piloted Ntombi Vimbela through the workshops that we conducted with the young women. And really the aim here was to test the acceptability of the content, but to also test how feasible are the delivery methods that we use to deliver the intervention. And that was conducted between August and October 2019. So what are the methods that we used in the first activity, which was the formative research? We worked in 2 conveniently selected universities and 6 TVET institutions, and these were selected in collaboration with Department of Higher Education. These were the sites where we worked. Together they were 8. We quantitatively surveyed female students between age 18 and 30, and the total was 1,272. We also conducted qualitative research in a form of focus group discussions with female students themselves. 13 groups were interviewed to be able to gather this data. We also worked with groups of men, where we had 8 male students, where we conducted focus group discussions with them. We also conducted peer educator FGDs in amongst 13 groups. We also worked with student support staff in these institutions, and 18 of them were interviewed in this process. We also spoke to the survivors of sexual violence, and we were able to interview 15 of those. In terms of the research, the quantitative findings amongst the students that we did, you can see that I've listed for you number of students that we worked with in the TVETs, number of students that we worked with in the institutions. What our data showed us is that 20% had experienced sexual violence in the past year. And amongst these, 17.3 had experienced partner sexual violence, 7.5 had experienced non-partner rape. And what this then is telling us is that, yes, all of them were vulnerable to experience sexual violence, but it was interesting for us to learn that when you're comparing amongst different categories of students, TVET participants were the ones that were most vulnerable if you're comparing them with the 15% of the university students. We then went deeper to our data to try and understand what are the factors that influence this vulnerability to the experience of sexual violence? What makes these young women to experience this sexual violence? We found a number of vulnerability factors. Food insecurity was one of the issues. We found high levels of food insecurity amongst the students, which were increasing vulnerability to the experience of sexual violence. And I'll try and unpack that later when I talk about this, the sexual behaviors that these young women ended up, engaging in, some of them which were risky because of some of these structural drivers trying to make sure that they find food and can provide for themselves and be able to survive. We found differences when we were comparing between TVET and university students around food security issues. That again, a similar consistent finding amongst TVET participants that were more vulnerable compared to university students to food insecurity issues. We also learned that childhood sexual abuse was associated with the vulnerability. Those that had experienced childhood sexual abuse were more vulnerable to, the experience of sexual violence at this point in their lives. We also found that female students that had partners that were controlling were likely to experience intimate partner violence. Those were in relationships that, with men that were controlling, trying to dictate what happens, when sex will be done, how it will be done, were more likely to experience intimate partner violence. We also learned about the high mental health issues that these female students were experiencing. Many of them, our data showed that they experienced depressive symptoms, PTSD, they had suicidal thoughts, and again, mental health was amongst the vulnerabilities to the experience of sexual violence. Now, the issue of risky sexual behavior that I spoke about earlier on, we found that some of these young women were in relationships with multiple partners. They were engaging in transactional sex, and you would understand now the association with food insecurity. It could be that, they were not willingly engaging in these behaviors, but they were trying to avert some of these structural challenges that they were experiencing, one being food insecurity. But we also found high levels of harmful alcohol use amongst the female students, and that also being amongst the factors that are associated with the experience of sexual violence in higher education institutions. So moving on to the qualitative data and what we found there, our findings show that, there were a number of factors that were driving. Now, this was found through qualitative research where we spoke with the students. What I presented earlier on was data that is coming out from the survey, but this was through the discussions, the conversations that we had with these different categories of students, through the focus group discussions, through the interviews that we did with them. We learned that in terms of the perpetration, because earlier on I did highlight that we also spoke to men, we tried to find out what are some of the factors that are making them to perpetrate this experience. But even not only themselves, other people around the institution, other men, not necessarily talking about what they are doing. We learned that perpetration is driven by acceptance of patriarchal social gender norms, where some of the boys are from families where they are taught that, a man is the person whom, when they say this, their word goes, they get to dictate, in the home, what happens when sex is done. All those patriarchal gender norms were some of the issues that they carried, in their lives, and was influencing some of the behaviors regarding perpetration of sexual violence. We also found that they bring this into their intimate relationships with their partners, where they even feel sexual entitlement to, once somebody says they love you, it means that, they are entitled to their bodies. Whenever you want to have sex with them, you don't even have to get consent. Consent was when somebody said yes to the relationship. We also found that some of them do this because of the pressure that they feel from their friends. Issues of hypersexuality amongst the men, acceptance of rape myths and attitudes, being victim blaming, that it's a woman's fault that they've been sexually violated. Why was somebody dressing in a particular way? Why was somebody in a particular place? Why did you take my money? Why did you allow me to buy you drinks when you think I'm just doing that for free? So all of those beliefs contributed to male perpetration of sexual violence. Amongst the female students, we found that vulnerability was associated with poor socioeconomic background. Some of them coming from background of lack at home. They come here, they don't have food, they don't have clothes, and they succumb to the pressure to have material resources. When they come in, they want to look a particular way without, having, not understanding, at that point, the socioeconomic background, working against them, and they will try to make means to be able to still find these things. At the end of the day, agreeing to relationships that, are controlling, are not good, they are toxic to them, just so they can be able to feel that need as they come into this context. Engaging in transactional relationships, but some of them also being naive when they come to this context. Accepting gifts, accepting money without thinking that these men are actually doing some of these things to be able to get something from it. We also found issues of poor safety and security in some of the campuses, exposing young women to the experience of sexual violence. Residences were found as hotspots where some of the sexual violence incidences happen. And in this context, rape happened where there are parties or there are bashes. Some of the men deliberately planning to be able, they'll be discussing amongst themselves that, tonight I'm taking one home, setting up these parties, setting up these bashes, so that, with the plan to do something at the end. We also learned about poor institutional responses in some of the campuses, where we found women reporting that there was limited support, but some of them highlighting that, they've lost trust in the system itself. They would, the issues of privacy, they think it's not there amongst the student support staff. They would rather not report because they do not feel that they'll be afforded the help that they need, but also the privacy, talking about why should I go and report to that office when tomorrow I'll be seen, walking around in campus and I'll be labeled. So all of those issues were highlighted. But amongst the staff itself, we found that many of them reported being overloaded, having to deal with a number of issues as the student support units, reporting that they're not only supposed to be assisting students, but some of them are also doing NASFA's, administration. And that for them was a problem because they felt that it was a bit overwhelming to be able to do this. But we also learned that amongst the students who experienced sexual violence and went and reported these issues, they found from their experience, they thought that there was lack of punitive measures for the perpetrators. And at the end of the day, they felt that they had not gotten the help that they needed. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of a theoretical underpinnings that we are basing our study on. Having learned all that we learned about the drivers of sexual violence in these institutions, we then identified modifiable risk factors. We asked ourselves, what are some of the things that can be modifiable to be able, to help young women to prevent this experience of sexual violence? And one of the things was sensitizing young women about the risk of sexual violence. When are you most likely to be violated? What are some of the risk factors? What are some of the men that are more likely, to violate you sexually? We also spoke to them about what they can do in context where they see that I'm at risk of sexual violence. We talk about building self-confidence, empowering them around sexual violence issues, building their self-esteem, but also helping them to deal with some of the structural issues, for example, issues of budgeting, issues of, how to navigate the system itself. When you come in, there's pressure, but how do you still cope in that context? We also spoke to them about gender norms. We spoke about violence. Those are some of the risk factors that we thought they are modifiable and we can assist young women navigate. So I'll be talking to you now about the intervention itself, how it was developed, the process that we followed to develop the intervention. I've spoken to you about the formative research that we conducted. We then analyzed the data, the theory of change. I've just spoken to it in the previous slide. We then set as a team, drawing and adapting from other interventions that have been found to be effective in other settings. And one of them was the EAAA, which was developed for Canadian students or Canadian campuses, which was found to be effective in addressing sexual assault risk and helping young women to resist sexual violence. We also built from the Stepping Stones intervention, which is an intervention that was tested in the Eastern Cape and other settings in South Africa and found to be effective to address sexual gender-based violence. We also drawing from the SASA intervention, which was developed in Uganda and also found to be effective. But through this, we then drew from the new content in these settings. What is particularly important? What are some of the things that we can, impact on to be able to prevent sexual violence? From then, after developing the intervention, and the sessions in a manualized format, we went and reviewed it amongst our peers. We sent it to the other colleagues to review it. We revised the draft and the draft sessions. We recruited and trained facilitators from the institutions, from the TVETs, from the universities. After the recruitment, these are the people who then implemented our interventions in these institutions. They went, they implemented, we revised the sessions. We first through the training, we moved to the revision. We then finalized the intervention. We sent them to the sites to pilot the intervention. They worked in 8 sites where they implemented the interventions. At that point, we started with the data collection so we can be able to track progress and see if there's any change. We administered the survey, we administered the FGDs, we administered the intervention, the interviews. We then evaluated after 1 year follow-up. We then, from there, we drew data, we did the analysis to be able to assess acceptability and feasibility of the intervention and finalize the manual. This is the intervention, just a snapshot of the Ntombi Vimbela intervention that I've been talking to you about. It is a risk reduction and resistance manualized intervention for 18-year to 30-year-old female students in South African higher education. For those of you who are not Zulu or Xhosa, Ntombi means girl or woman, or Zulu, it's a Xhosa or a Zulu word. Vimbela is, it means to prevent, to resist, to restrain, to block, or to deter. So these are the key themes that are covered in Ntombi Vimbela. I think I'm just going to direct you to the colorful bubbles there on your right, where you can see, starting from the green bubble on top, Ntombi Vimbela takes young women through a session where they deal with material pressures. Actually, let's start on the purple bubble on your right. We start the workshop by getting to know each other. We teach young women how to assert themselves. There's a session that focuses on sex and consent. We talk about men and relationships, men, women, and relationships. We talk about violence against women and how to support somebody who's experienced violence. We talk about maintaining well-being. We take young women through a session where, they are taught how to assess sexual assault risk, and the next one being how to resist. And the resistance component is where we teach young women how to do self-defense, how to verbally and non-verbally resist risky sexual assault situation. The delivery methods we use here, we use participatory learning approaches. We brainstorm with them, we reflect together, we work in pairs in small groups. There's lots of games and energizers because this is there are 10 workshops of 3.5-hour sessions. So these are done so we can keep young women engaged. Also a reflective process of learning and brainstorming rather than a teaching approach to the intervention. So at the end of the workshops, we then sat with young women. We conducted what we called a closing FGD, where we evaluated how they experienced the 10 workshops that they have been through. We asked young women to reflect on Ntombi Vimbela. Is this something that, is applicable in their daily lives? How they found the content of the intervention. Was it relevant to their day-to-day experiences, to their daily lives? How they found the topics, we also reflect with them how the activities were. And this is just to assess the delivery methods that we used. So this is some of the preliminary data that came from the interviews that we had about hearing feedback about the intervention that we piloted. Most participants said they found NV relevant, relatable, and appropriate in their daily lives. I have snapshots there of some of the things that they said, that it was relevant to me. It speaks to something that I'm experiencing every day. But also others spoke about how it improved communication, that after having gone through the workshops, they felt that they can now communicate better. They are more assertive in their relationships. They are able to self-express to their partners. They are able to initiate some of the conversations that were difficult to talk about before. Some of them said it improved their self-confidence and bodily autonomy. There I have a quotation of a young woman who said she was struggling with her appearance, but after having gone through the workshop, she felt that her self-esteem was bolstered and that she is now more confident and no longer cares what other people think about her body. She now walks confidently and that has reduced stress for her. We also found that Ntombi Vimbela had shifted gender beliefs, and some of them had started to challenge harmful gender norms. A young woman here talking about a home where she's coming from and saying how that has changed because she was taught in a particular way, knowing that, men are supposed to do things this way, women are supposed to do things this way. Now she felt that she's able to challenge some of the things and, some of the background that she's coming from. Some of them highlighted that they now feel confident. Should sexual violence happen, should she encounter a risky sexual assault situation, they said that they felt much more comfortable to be able to resist. Others also highlighted that Ntombi Vimbela, for the first time, it gave them an opportunity to talk about their experiences of sexual violence, because some of them, had bottled these experiences. They had not spoken about it before, but feeling that it kind of gave them a safe space where they could be able to talk about their experience amongst other women who understand and have gone through the similar experience, being able to receive empathy in these workshops. So what are the key messages that we came up with from having done all of this work? Really, these are the take-home key points that I want you to take with you. NV content was relevant. Ntombi Vimbela content was very, very relevant amongst young women. It's relatable, it's something that they can relate with. It is appropriate for first-year female students. These are, drawn from the data that we got from them. Training these peer students and working with student support staff in this institution to deliver intervention was very good. It went well because we are also wanting to assess the methods and how that goes. We found that we could still train peer facilitators, have them be the ones that implement the intervention and still achieving the fidelity of the intervention, doing it the way that it was intended to be done. We have shown that Ntombi Vimbela is an evidence-informed intervention. It's multi-component in that it's addressing various components relating to gender transformation, resilience building, mental health focus, sexual risk identification, and resistance. The pilot has also highlighted for us that, Ntombi Vimbela is empowering. Female students felt empowered. They felt that they are now much more confident to be able to resist. But if somebody fails to resist and they encounter a situation, they know how to resist using the self-defense strategies or skills that they've been through. However, having found all this positive feedback, we understand that Ntombi Vimbela was not tested through a trial. This was just a small pilot that we did. So as in terms of future work, we would still want to do a well-designed impact evaluation where we will have a control group, take these young women through an intervention, have the intervention group, have a control group, and assess the effectiveness of the intervention. But also as part of the planned future work that we...
Ms. Mahlangu, is it possible if we can ask you to maybe just to do your final findings of your research? Ms. Pinky Mahlangu? Yes, please, if you can just do your final findings. Thank you.
Yes, I think I'm not sure if you can hear me, Masha.
Very well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, but those are the findings. So in terms of where we at with the work, we have just applied for funding to do an RCT where we'll be testing the intervention with young women. We are also planning to also involve with men. So we'll be developing an intervention for male students in higher education institution and also working with the LGBTQI community. So yeah, that's where we're at. Yeah, unless there's questions, I'm happy to address that in the chat. Thank you very much.
Ms. Trudy, please switch on your microphone for audio.
Thank you, Pinky. And I don't think you will get off as easy as that by answering the questions in the chat, because there was a lot of questions running in to the chat already. And I'm going to ask you to join the discussion now and to also to answer some of the questions. But I want to give you, and there were many of these in the chat when they came in, you can read it yourself, but I want to read one, and that is also the sentiment, I think, of everyone around the table. It's coming from Weiswe Maziza, and she says, hats up for Ntombi Vimbela. My light shine to young vulnerable girls from needy backgrounds. And I think that is what we all want to say, is empower every girl in the PSET system to be a girl and to be a full participant in PSET and not subdued to other races and other genders. So colleagues, that brings us to the end of our presentations, and thank you also for, I think, a valuable and a spread of valuable presentations that were given from Linda with the focus on inclusivity and RPL, right through to Gertrude, to September, as well as to Dr. Pinky. That's really giving us a snapshot on research that has been done on several aspects of inclusivity. That is one of the principles of open learning. So may I kindly ask that all the participants all the presenters put on their videos, and then we will entertain some questions. Again, while they're putting on their videos, I just want to say again that all presentations, as well as the videos of the presentations and the question and the answers, will be available on the microsite. We will just give them a little bit of time to answer the questions, but it will be very important also that you can read what other people has said about the presentations and the questions that were asked. So while we're waiting, I think there's still one missing. I think it's Gertrude. Oh, there she is. Okay, okay, Sitiba, thanks a lot. It's good seeing you all. And again, thank you for really, really exciting presentations. And you won't believe I've got a stack of questions like this next to me that I'm going to ask. And Linda, we have lost you while you were in your question and answer session. So you are also going to get a lot of questions in this session. So I'm going to give the first question to you. And Henrietta Mongalu is asking, students that are entering academic studies, and you have answered it, I've seen you have attempted to answer that in the chat, that when students are entering academic studies, are there really successes that you know of in implementing RPL for access to studies?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I had responded that there are many examples, but I realize that we do really need to have actual data on which to base, answers like that. Perhaps the most successful example of students into undergraduate study and their rates of success are found in a chapter of a book that I mentioned and that I've now put up in the chat, a study of RPL into undergraduate study at UWC. What made that particularly successful, I think, was the institutionalization of the RPL process. So it had its own unit. It ran a very structured process, a 3-month course for portfolio development. And I think that that's maybe the key answer lies in the kind of support and rigor with which that RPL process takes place. In that chapter in the book, they talk about the numbers who initially show interest in RPL, and they talk about, well over 1,000 per year, and then the numbers that actually enter the course. So the numbers come down and down and down to about 300 after a whole lot of advisory work has happened, and then the numbers that come through the course successfully, which is about 100 or 120. So, I think that it's very feasible, but it needs a lot of support and careful planning to ensure success. Thanks.
Ms. Trudy, please put on your microphone. We can't hear you yet.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. And I think it's very important. Yes, it's taking place, but we don't know about. We have to share it much more. And I think this is also the purpose of the research colloquium is to make contacts with people that you can share more of what is happening, because it is happening on a small scale, but we also have to think about how can we massify and apply it in a massive scale. The next question, Gertrude, I hope this time you will be able to answer the question from the US. And the question that was asked is, was there evidence of lecturer capacity training to use gadgets by visually impaired students, or were these specific people trained to help the students if they are struggling to use the gadgets? Can you just put on your sound to see if we can hear you this time?
Your volume is very low. We can't hear you, Ms. Gertrude.
It seems that we have got a problem with the connection from the US, is that there's no sound. So Gertrude, can I ask you that you answer that question in the chat, please? We can't hear you, sorry. I'm going to go to the next question. And that is specifically for Pinky. Pinky, I think people's reaction to your presentation is really, everybody wants to know more. And at the end, you started talking about the empowerment of men. And the question is, what do you think is the way that we can sensitize and empower men to change behavior so that we can curb the gender-based violence in our PSET institutions? Because it's interesting that it's so high, the occurrence of it is so high, specifically in the PSET institutions. And is there already, I know you said that you want to still go and do some research on men, but have you got any ideas on how can we empower that? It must have come up with your interviews with the ladies and the few men that you did.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Gertrude. Behavior change is a very difficult process, as you would understand. But from our side, what we have identified as some of the activities that we could do, which we think could work, is engaging men in gender transformative workshops where we sit with them, because sometimes we take for granted how much some people are not exposed to positive, messages and education, even simple things like sex and consent. So I think one of the things that we're planning to do as a next steps in our organization is to do focus group discussion workshops where we sit together like we did with the young women. We go through the very small, simple things about gender. What is gender-based violence, for example? What is sex and consent? What do we mean when we say respect women? So that is the plan. However, I cannot say for sure that will work, that will change behavior. Behavior change is a very complicated process, which might not just happen through the workshops. So these would just be the first steps that would, engage in and see how the process goes. So yeah, that is that. Gender transformation workshops is definitely one of the key things that we're planning to do with the young men.
Thanks. And I would like people to comment on that in the comments and say, what do you think? What else can we do? And maybe Pinky can pick that up also in her research, because I think that is the biggest challenge. Even when you listen to the minister's introductory video to this webinar, is how are we changing the behavior of men in the system, of young men? Of the cultural beliefs, about the societal beliefs, and about the group dynamics within the culture of young men leaving school and coming into a university or a TVET college setting. The next question, Linda, I think there's another question that's coming your way from Louis Nzira, is what is the best approach of training RPL practitioners within the TVET sector as to create broader accessibility of our society?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thanks for that question. I was actually pondering an earlier question that Vikus had put forward about how to take forward RPL in a regulated environment. And I was thinking of all the pieces that need to be in place in order to ensure that it works smoothly. And I think staff training would be one of the most important elements of that. we have got some examples of RPL facilitator training courses that exist. There was one, for example, offered by the Cape Higher Education Consortium as one of the modules within their broader diploma for higher education lecturers. And I think that there are others that are around. I've just been involved with an initiative, in fact, by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, where they have developed an online course for RPL facilitators, anywhere in the world. So these courses do exist, but maybe just to say that I think our own approach is that I'm not saying that it has to be a theoretically heavy course, but I think that the assumptions about learning and about knowledge that need to be understood and made by the RPL facilitator are just as important as introducing them to various practical tools like portfolios and other kinds of tools that could be used in the training of RPL facilitators. Thanks.
Thanks for that answer, Linda. The next question is going to Sinatemba. A statement is being made that SSS, the Student Support Services in a TVET college, can play a much bigger role in opening up learning, especially opening access to education and remove the barriers to learning. And you have touched on some of the barriers. So then the person says SSS should not be seen as open learning as a competency of only the curriculum unit. Is this also your observation in your findings, that open learning is being seen as only a curriculum unit responsibility and not the responsibility of the whole college, including the SSS? And then in your mind, what needs to be done to increase and to open up learning for all students at TVET colleges?
Thank you for the question. I think it was from Henrietta. So I think there was also a previous comment by Henrietta regarding open learning and being solely about access to technology. So I will answer both of those or respond to both comments. And just starting off to, I think open learning is definitely at times confused with technological improvement or just aligned to access to technology, which of course that is not so. So I agree with Henrietta's view, is that it's not merely, it definitely goes beyond technological access. And just to also my observation while doing the research, again, just to remember is that this research was undertaken while TVET colleges were under national lockdown and students were at home. So there was lots of pressure around student supports at that time. And when I spoke to student support services staff at the college, a lot of the pressure was around them not sure where they are or where to place themselves in terms of best supporting students mobility. So this also put some thoughts in my mind, as well as some of my own observations, is that could the current perceptions when I did my research be tied to some of the challenges that they were confronted with at the time? And of course, and the challenges of them being able to give students sufficient support remotely. And are we also, so for me also some of the questions that were coming around during this research is, are we also seeing that this is also a consequence of linking academic support to teaching and learning? So those are also some of the questions that I'm still grappling with as I went through the data and I was writing my chapter. Moving to your next comment about open learning. For me, of course, I must give you my background. I'm coming from the built environment background, and coming into education, I think being able to do, which is also my interest, about interdisciplinary research, and being able to look at open learning for me from a larger scale, or a broader scale, if I can say. So for me, open learning is cannot, or rather, I would not perceive it as a responsibility of a certain person or a certain department, but it's not an added workload, but it's more of a way of doing things. It's not merely for me a set of principles, but a way of, it's more of a movement, and a way of how can we create a more socially just environment in the TVET sector. And for me, that's what the open learning principles represent. And in terms of looking at it in a broader scale of specifically referring to my observations during the research when students, or engaging with students who were now at home. And looking at it is looking at student support from a perspective that places it not only solely on the institution, but looking at student support from a broader scale, where how do we support students from home, from within their communities? And coming from, or at least looking at sort of interdisciplinary research in terms of what is the role of surrounding institutions? How does the college as an institution, how does it interact with other government services within the area? How do we then use municipalities or communities with where the students are centered to be a part of this, in terms of a part of supporting students? Perhaps how do we look at open learning as a form of student support within those areas? So those are all some of the questions or subjects that I've been coming up with, and looking at literature, I think from Maimani, who looked at, who for me espouses or suggests, or rather puts in that idea from me in terms of how do we look at student support services in a wider context, in a wider societal context for students. And that for me is there, I would definitely, I would be more than excited to see a bigger scale of this research in terms of student support services and open learning. I would definitely, it is a very interesting research, and would love to see it in a bigger scale, where we can draw findings from a bigger sample. And we can make further recommendations and look at it from a wider societal view. I will stop there for now. Thank you so much, Trudy.
Thank you, and thanks for that beautiful smile. It's really good to see your smile. Colleagues, Gertrude, can I just check, is your sound now working? Gertrude? It seems like it's still not working. Sorry, it seems it worked perfectly this morning, and you woke up so early to assist us in this. And I'm so sorry that we can't hear you, but we will ask definitely that you going to ask to answer the questions in writing. So I'm going to skip that question that asked about the gadgets, and she will answer that question. Linda, I want to come back to you. The question that we started asking, or that we asked and didn't answer when your connection just dropped, is coming from Vickers and asking, how could RPL be regulated with regard to the costing model timeframes, moderation of processes, etc., to help ensure that it's used effectively within our standardized manner.
Yes, thanks very much for that question. And it was quite nice to have a bit of time to think about it while while the other presentations were going on, because it's quite a challenging question. And in order to answer it, I wanted to just refer briefly to some current work that I've been involved in with my colleague Alan Ralphs, advising a small higher education institution, a not-for-profit institution, to put in place an RPL system. And I think that the answer to the question that Vico's put forward actually lies in a whole institution approach. In other words, that we shouldn't see RPL as some kind of outside, addition to what an institution should be doing. It really should be integrated with all the systems. And I must say that I think I agree with the previous speaker just about not seeing it as part of the way the institution works as a whole. So what we have been working on is not only putting a policy in place for the institution, but looking at how the information services, the marketing of the institution includes RPL, how the advisory services for students includes trained staff who can advise students on RPL, integrating an RPL application system with the usual application system, a lot of staff training, both for academic and for administrative staff. And then we've put in place 2 modules which actually count for credit, and they involve the RPL candidate enrolling for the module, and in the process of completing the module, producing a portfolio. So in other words, integrating it with the institutional process as a whole means that it gets, I think it's an efficient approach, but also that it gets quality assured along with all the other processes that are regularly quality assured. But just one point that I wanted to make before I stop is that even though one can achieve quite a high degree of efficiency and also quality assurance, at the end of the day, I really do think that we need to see RPL as a pedagogic engagement, where one has to work to assist each student to surface and identify and profile their prior learning. And that does take time, and it takes careful thought on the part of staff that are involved with that process. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, good.
Thank you, Linda, for that. And I think if we look at our international participants also in this webinar, is that there are, I went through the chat, so I maybe missed somebody, but again, I want to acknowledge our participant from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, as well as Karen from Eswatini. You are regular visitors to our webinars, and it's really for us encouraging that we also got this international people looking at what we are doing in South Africa. So I want to, Linda, your last question that's coming through from the group, because we are going to end the session at 12:30, is coming from Pedro, is do you find that with RPL, there will be almost always be a skills or knowledge training gap? And is this mainly due to previous disadvantaged practices in learning, or is it due to the structure of the qualifications in South Africa? Very interesting question, and now you don't have time to think about it.
I'm sorry, I just missed the very first part of the question. Do I find that there's a knowledge and skills gap?
She made a statement and say, do you find that with RPL, there's almost always a skills knowledge training gap if you compare it to academic studies? And then she gives the two scenarios and say, is it mainly due to the previous disadvantage of the learning, or is it due to the rigid qualification system in South Africa?
Wow. No, it's a lovely question. Thanks very much for it. And it's something that I think that we've really struggled with, certainly for all the years that I've been engaged with RPL. There will always be a gap. And I don't particularly like even the terminology of the gap, because it suggests a deficiency, whereas very often it's not entirely a deficiency. You know, that the formal education institution is wanting this and we can only offer that. It's more a question of a non-alignment between what the RPL candidate is bringing and what the curriculum is demanding, or, you know, in terms of knowledge, a foundation. And I think that if we can see it like that, then we can also see ways in which to connect those two. And very often that might actually involve a bit of extra learning on the part of the RPL candidate. But equally, it might be that the curriculum itself needs to be slightly adjusted to allow a better engagement between those coming in, particularly if they're quite large numbers coming in via RPL into a module. And the disability studies course that I mentioned earlier this morning was exactly that. They had large numbers of RPL students, and they adjusted their curriculum in order to really make the most benefit out of the knowledge that was brought in. But I think that occasionally there is a gap in the real sense of that word. In other words, that the candidate is able to cope in some ways, but might not be able to cope in others. And in that case, I think that one then advises them, in addition to access, that they need to do some kind of catch up in some area of their knowledge and skills. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Thanks.
Thank you for that very interesting answer to that question, because I think it's RPL. When I am talking about RPL, I always ask, is it not the recognition of learning and not necessarily prior learning? Because learning is a continuous process, and how do you recognize the learning that's taking place outside the organization? And there we start talking of micro-credentials again. And that's a very interesting discourse if you go into that. But thanks also for that answer. Pinky, I think you are anticipating this question all the time, because everybody's asking this question to you, but I have to ask it. And it's coming from several people, and I'm going to combine all the questions. And they asking are your report or article, and then specifically the manuals that you were talking about, are they available for use in institutions? And you could have expected that answer, that question.
Yeah, thanks, Trudy, for that. So we have publications in journal articles where we have written about Ntombi Vimbela, but we are also just finalizing our manual. I've sent my email address for those who might be interested in having the manual. As soon as we finalize, I'd be able to share, but I can also send you the articles so you can read some more on Ntombi Vimbela.
Thank you for that. And I think you can also send it to us, and then we can make it available on our microsite. And I hope our microsite will not give the 404 error like some people have said in the chat, but it's happening. We will have the technical people look at that. Thanks for that, Pinky. And now I'm going to give the last question to an individual, and then I'm going to ask one question to all of our participants. And this September, the last question is addressed to you. And the statement that's being made is open learning is mainly confused with e-learning and other terminology. And the part of removing barriers to entry is overlooked by focusing more on the gadgets and on technology and on ICT and so forth. And I want your view on, does it go beyond gadgets and access to the internet? And how do you address those other issues that's not about the technology access and about cost of connectivity and so forth?
Senator Timber, please switch on your microphone. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for that question. I think my previous answer, I slightly touched on it, but let me go into a bit more depth in answering the question. So I definitely do believe that student support goes much more beyond just technological access or rather technology or digital access or internet access. It's more in a broader scale. I think, as I started off with in my presentation, is that the study was triggered by the need for South African education institutions to cater to the needs of the diverse student population. So here there is quite a bit that student support must now come in to support that diverse population. So we're looking, that may be economic, it can be cultural and social diversity, and it could be political, or rather I can also say inclusive representation and decision making. So those are just broadly stating some of the areas that you may anticipate some inequalities that student support services might look at addressing. You get, let me make a little bit more practical examples. You'll get people who are older of age coming into TVET institutions to further their academics. You're getting people who are, I think one of the videos that were played before this presentation started, you get people who are coming into higher education for the first time. They're the first people in their families to access higher education. So there you may find some cultural they new to higher education environments. So that's where student support services must also come in to ensure that there's that equality in terms of access, not just to the digital or technology, but access to just the cultural environment to support those students coming in. So that's where student support services broadly comes in. I would definitely refer you to the chapter once it's out to read further in terms of how I see student support services and open learning as going beyond that technological support. But I think in terms of that, that's where I am. If you can just remind me the second part of the question, Trudy. I think that it was two-phased.
Thank you for that. I think you have answered that, because the second part is goes it beyond just the gadgets and the access to the internet? But I think you have answered that.
Oh.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thanks a lot. That brings us almost to the end of our discussion, but I want to pose now a question to every one of our participants. And Gertrude, I think you were the person who raised this issue, where you said that make open learning practices implementable at all institutions. and I think that is what we want to say. Every topic that we discuss today is how do you implement it at our institutions? How do you make it practically possible? And some of the issues, Gertrude, that you have recommended was advocacy and communication, more workshops with people, and also expanding research. And I want to link it with a question that was asked by Kiribone Seku, who asked, is there research that has been done in the CET college sector? We only hear about universities and TVET colleges, and we don't hear anything about the CET sector. So I want to ask each one of you to, just for closing, is in your area or your topic of research that you have presented today, what research gaps are there? What must we look at to make it more implementable, that it's more practical, implementable? And Pinky, I think you raised the issue of the men workshop, the workshop for young men and so forth. That is a gap that you are filling. But I want to know is, what else do you think are research gaps that people have to look at? And how can we implement your area better? Just give it as a closing remark. So can I ask, can we start with Linda and then goes to Setembe and then to Pinky and Gertrude? It seems we can't hear you, my dear. I don't know what happened today.
Can you still not hear me?
Well, we can.
Gertrude, we can hear you. Can you go ahead, please, while we're hearing you? Sorry, Linda, can you speak?
No, it's great.
Oh, okay.
And you can answer all the questions that were
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You'll have to remind me because I lost contact with that. But the first one about the evidence of people being trained, I tried to answer it on the chat. I think the lecturers were just going to extremes in learning all that and providing students with the necessary assistance that they can to remove all the barriers in their learning. So I really answered that on the chat. What was the next question, Trudy?
Sorry, now I have to go back to my questions. The next question that was asked is, you were talking about there are support, but students are not always willing to declare their disabilities. And what can we do to get students to declare their disabilities? Do you have any idea?
I would suggest that there should be a kind of workshop before the students get admitted into the TVET colleges or even the CET, because I've had people raise questions about the research is being done on universities and TVET colleges, not about that, the CETs. I would suggest it goes across the board that, we kind of some workshops in gathering all the differently able people and, make them see the need of disclosing their disabilities in a way of helping them in furthering their education, instead of thinking that they'll be like stigmatized about it, because that's what I found out in my interviews, that they really don't want to disclose their disabilities, and along the process it gives the lecturers a problem because they never knew about it, and then they in any way still they try to help, but at times it's difficult because it's like being neglected long way and not knowing about it, because the student never wanted to the lecturers to know about it or the colleges as to know about it. So I would strongly recommend that we have that kind such workshops in recruiting this different able people, and talk about it, and have some maybe clinical psychologists professionals in every kind of disability to address this, and to make them be open about it in their best interest. I don't know whether I've answered the question to the
Thanks for that. Just don't put off your sound, please, because there's another question coming your way. And that is around, sorry, now I'm first find it on my table. I'm so excited to see that I'm now losing your questions. And that is coming from a Chirwa participant. And he says, what is your advice in terms of lecture training for people with disabilities? How can we empower the lecturer for assisting and for supporting people with disabilities?
It goes back to hiring specific related employees in regard to whatever the disability thing is, of which I think it's going to be difficult. Because why I'm saying it's difficult, I'll refer to even the resources of doing that. But if there are people, honestly, that are really trained in whatever kind of disability, it would be help into looking into that. But if not, there are no such people for a certain TVET college, or maybe through the applications that I got through the process of applying for a certain position. I would strongly suggest that there should be some training done for the lecturers in different aspects of different able people, in trying to make the lecturer familiar with what they should expect in classes, or what they should expect from this differently able students. But I think Motero is really in the process of doing that. Actually, they're already implementing that, because I remember during our interviews, the manager expressed that they do have such trainings that they often hold regularly, and I think they're doing quite well. So if other TVET colleges can maybe engage with Inclusivity, with Motero, just to get to know what to do in their perspectives, that will be very helpful.
Thank you for that, Gertrude, and it was so good hearing your voice. Linda, can we go back to you for your closing remarks?
Yes, thanks very much. There's so much research, I'm not sure where to begin, but I will just mention one or two. I think the question about the CET, the Community Education and Training Colleges, is a really interesting and important one, because it has been neglected. What I have found interesting from some of the initial research done on the CET colleges is how many of them are bringing in or attracting youth who have dropped out of school but who want to now come back and finish. And I think in the future, the CET college sector can play an enormous role for out-of-work youth, for young people who might never have a formal job in their lives. And so it's an interesting area to research what kind of knowledge they could bring to the institution, and then how it could be linked to some kind of life path, if not a career path, some kind of life path that is sustainable for them in the future. I think that the other really urgent research need, and this is taken from some of the comments in today's chat, is that we need tracer studies. We need some large-scale studies of people who have actually gone through the RPL process. What have been their experiences? what has been the rate of success, and what has affected, what has shaped their ability to succeed. We included that question in one or two of our small case studies that were published in the book, but there is a need for a much wider study that will be able to build confidence in the ability of RPL to be more inclusive. Thank you. Thanks very much, Jay.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks for that answer. Really appreciate it. Sinatemba, can we go to you now?
Thank you so much for the question again, Trudy. So I think for me, what's important in terms of this this topic, for me, student support services is vital in higher education institutions, not only for the role it plays, as I've described before, in terms of opening access to the diverse population, but also in terms of fostering student success. And I definitely believe that firstly, the upscaling of this research would contribute positively in terms of having the potential to not only strengthen the Department of Higher Education and Training's plans for student support, but also to strengthen the impact of student support on the ground, and also to assist in terms of creating awareness around open learning as a form of student support. So I definitely believe that this is an under-researched area, and would play a great impact in terms of upscaling this research and creating an awareness from here and building up to wider engagements with the implementers of, for example, the student support services plans, as well as the implementers of the DHET's draft open learning policy. So it opens up that dialogue, and it starts those conversations and creates those awareness, which is much needed. And just in terms of looking at student support services in a larger scale, as in its own has that social justice intent of creating an environment in higher education, environment where there's an equal footing among students, and being able to harness such an environment for student success, regardless of which path you have walked in your previously before entering the tertiary environment. Let me stop there for now, and I thank you so much.
Thank you, Sinatemba. Pinky, can I give the microphone to you now?
Yes, thanks, Trudy. Thanks for that question. It's a big question, though, that you've asked. But I think for me, a couple of things. I think most of the research that has emerged in the past few years around gender-based violence has mainly focused on women. So one of the gaps, which I've also alluded to in my presentation, is the focus on men and the focus on the LGBTQI students. So that's one. As we develop these interventions, we should also not leave those groups behind, because they also experience high levels of sexual violence. But also, as we understand some of the gender norms that are driving perpetration of violence, we also need to think about mental health. I think mental health is one of the key research areas that needs to be explored in gender-based violence research for all the groups, both women, men, and the LGBTQI. But I think one of the things in terms of the practical steps that can be done around addressing gender-based violence is to, make sure that in all the institutions, we provide orientation around gender-based violence. As students come into the institutions, we need to make sure that they are all sensitized around gender-based violence in its varied and big scope in terms of the component itself, but not only leave it there. We need to consistently and continuously conduct workshops around gender-based violence. The community education and training Yes, we are taking that as an invite. This was just a pilot, not that we have excluded the CETs. We are coming there. We are looking forward to work with the CETs as well, not only with the TVETs and the universities. Hopefully in the next funding that we will get, we'll be able to include the CETs and also work in that space. So just to summarize, mental health is very important, very critical. We need to work with the LGBTQI. We also need to work with men. Thank you very much, Trudy.
Thanks, Pinky. I really appreciate that. And I think you are so honest and so straightforward. It's wonderful to working with you. Gertrude, let us see if the Van Wyks can come online again for your closing remarks.
Okay. For me, what is the burning issue here is, firstly, I would want to acknowledge Moteo for taking such a huge step in making sure that their different areas are being catered for. But the burning issue here is about the employers outside the Moteo College for the students. I'm not so sure how this can be dealt with. I would really ask the panel to give some input in this, or even the attendees, in trying to meet the students' needs outside the college, because with them to be employed, it seems to be a problem for them. Like I said, I really don't know what is it that can be done, because employers differ, and we cannot really dictate what to do at their work of place. And what the DHET and the colleges could do, I know we're running out of resources. Funding is a problem in our country, but I would strongly suggest that these differently able students can be somehow been built the infrastructure for them to be accommodated within the campus itself, to avoid spending on transport that they do not get funding from the NSFAS or whatever that is being funding them, and that they cannot, that would be able to help them as well, not to use their little money that they have from families or from whoever that is funding them, or donating to them. Like here in WKU, yes, I know I cannot compare South Africa with US, but what I've seen here at WKU, different able students, there are buses running around the campus, and they are using that with us not being differently abled, and then there are accommodations in the apartment that I am, even in the halls, they've made it special in such a way that it meets their needs. So I think, though I said we cannot compare South Africa with America, yes, but we can, with the resources available, we can do as such for our differently able students. I think that will ease their level a little bit.
Thanks for that, Gertrude. And
I think, that's what I had in mind.
I'm so glad we could hear your voice at the end. I felt so bad that we couldn't access you. We couldn't have access. We couldn't open up learning to you in the US. And thanks also for that. Participants and speakers, that brings us to the end of our session. I just want to comment on a few things that's on the comment. Somebody has asked, isn't there training for lecturers on disability inclusion available? And Professor Hodgkinson Williams have put a link onto the chat, Disability Access MOOC from the University of Cape Town, and she has put the link there to please contact her if you want to have access to that MOOC. And Ebeth Pedro, thanks also for your comments on RPL and how to apply it. It is a very good process, and how to mainstream it. And I think that is a lot of work still needs to go into that. That brings us to the end of our, and I think this was a very robust webinar. I don't know what the speakers are thinking about it, because if you look at the chat, how many comments were coming forth all the time. So I really want to thank you. Firstly, Linda, I want to thank Professor Cooper for a brilliant presentation and a thought-provoking presentation. I always gauge a presentation by the number of people that agree and disagree with you. And that is always, for me, a quality presentation. If you get people that says, I don't agree with you, and you have got them, not a lot of them, but I think that is very important, that discourse, that we can have a discussion and engagement on a topic. I really want to thank you for your time and your effort to assist also the Department of Higher Education in our quest for more research evidence on the work that we are doing. Thanks for your participation and your contribution. Then I want to thank Gertrude van Wyk, my sister, because we are both van Wyks and we both Gertrude, and that's the interesting one. So we are twins with the same name and the same surname, from the US, who got up very early in the morning, and she's got a whole day left in front of her. We're almost going home. Gertrude, it was really wonderful to listen to you and to hear your voice from the US. Thanks for your effort and for both your studies you were engaged in. I think a lot of valuable information came out of that. Then Sinetemba Zungu, I really want to thank you. I thank you for your smile. I thank you for your passion and your in-depth way and the passionate way that you have presented. It's really, if I see young people like you in the research, I'm looking forward to a great future for South Africa. And I always say that because you are the people. You know, Linda and I have got gray hair by now. So we are old, and we are exiting the system very soon. But you are the people who are taking it and running it forward with that. And thanks for that. We're really proud of young girls like you. And then Pinky, I always listen to you, and also to the way that you're presenting, and a topic that's very controversial, but that you are really looking into the depth of that. And at the end, is not saying this is just my findings, but practical ways of how can we address this very bad thing of gender-based violence in our society. Pinky, thanks for that. And also thanks for what you do for PSET Institution from the Medical Research Council. That's really for us from outside. You see, we are, the department is, or not the department, the post-school education and training system have got their own researchers and everything, but coming from outside and giving us a new perspective, but also assisting us is for us we really value your contribution that you've made also today and to the system. Thanks a million. And with that, colleagues, we see you on Wednesday for our big seminar, our colloquium, where we are focusing on open learning. We have got brilliant presenters. Our Deputy Minister is going to speak. The President of the Commonwealth of Learning in Vancouver, Canada is speaking. We have got Peter van Heijden, who's speaking from the Netherlands. We have got Professor Muku, who's the OER chair of UNESCO. So we have got several international speakers, but then we also have got the same amount of national speakers who's going to come and really give us an insight into different principles and different aspects and approaches of open learning. I'm looking forward to see you again, and thanks for your participation. Thanks to the speakers, the presenters, as well as to the participants. And then we see you on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks to our speakers.